If you are still disgusted by the vote in the United States Senate to block raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, well, you've come to the right place. It was despicable to watch people who, with a few exceptions, are millionaires and are making $174,000 a year. That's the salary of a U.S. senator, and have gold plated health care. They were running their mouths opposing giving people money so millions of people could just barely keep afloat. I mean, barely, because let me remind my listeners that if you work 52 weeks a year, 40 hours a week, that means no vacation, and get $15 an hour, you still only gross $31,200 a year, which is still poverty wages in most places in America. I've been doing a lot on the minimum wage on this podcast because it's so important. And you can check back in our archives and in my newsletter at Substack to get the details. I invite you, of course, to become a subscriber to the newsletter. But today I want to zero in on a very specific part of the minimum wage debate. And to do that, let's listen first to this short clip from Bernie Sanders, who was the principal champion of the minimum wage raise in the debate on the Senate floor.
And because this legislation will help workers all across the board, but it will significantly help women who are unfortunately forced into low-income work more than the general population, more than men, and it will disproportionately help African Americans and Latinos who disproportionately are forced into low-income work. This legislation is supported not only by 300 organizations, but by groups like the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. They understand that if we're going to improve the standard of living of the African American community, we ought to raise that minimum wage. You know, when we look at the economy, people look at the stock market, they look at a whole lot of indices out there. But at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what is going on in the lives of ordinary people? And it is not acceptable to me that half of our people live in paycheck to paycheck, and millions of people are trying to get by on $9, $10, $11 an hour. And you know what? You can't do that. You can't do that in Vermont, and you can't do it in California, you can't do it in Minnesota. You can't do that. And our job is to make sure that we have an economy that works for all and not just the few, and that in order to do that, we are going to have to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. Frankly, it is disgraceful that Congress has not passed an increase in the minimum wage since 2007. Think of all the things that have transpired since then, but Congress has not raised the minimum wage since 2007.
Now, Bernie's point echoes even more so today, since just this week, the planet marked International Women's Day. And as Bernie correctly said in that clip, women, and especially women of color, are disproportionately hurt by the immoral level of the federal minimum wage. So to give us the real-life experience of a minimum wage woman of color worker, I want to bring in Precious Cole. Precious lives in Durham, North Carolina, and works at Wendy's. She has been working minimum wage jobs for half her life, and like millions of other workers, has, year after year, not been able to meet her monthly bills on what is a poverty wage. Which is one reason that Precious has become a key activist and leader in North Carolina Raise Up, the state branch of the National Fight for 15 and a union. So, Precious, thank you very much for being on the show and giving my audience some insight into what you personally are experiencing as a minimum wage worker, and also the campaign that you are a key activist in North Carolina. I thought maybe we would start with a minute or two of what it's been like for you as a minimum wage worker. Give us a little bit of sense of your experience in the last few years. I know that you've been working in these jobs for almost half your life.
Yes, sir. I am now 30, 33. I'll be 34 in May. And I am a manager at a Wendy's here in Durham. And like I said, I've been in and out of minimum wage jobs my whole life. And it's it's very difficult for some of the stuff that we have to deal with, and not making enough money makes it worse. Um,
And
I,
as I understand it, at some point, not only have you had a challenge like many minimum wage workers, just making the regular bills every month, you experienced homelessness as well. So that's been a real emotional weight on you, I assume, every single month, worrying about not only do I have enough money to pay for food, but am I going to have a roof over my head?
yes, that was a very scary time in my life. It was very scary, but I knew that I still had to work because I, s- I had to survive. I had to. I had no choice.
And you're very proud of what you do. It's hard work. So basically, what you're campaigning for and trying to say to folks, everybody in the richest nation ever on the planet in human history, if you're working a full-time job, you should be able to pay your bills, right? That's just a basic idea.
Yes, at least have a roof over your head. At least, you know, be able to pay your bills. Don't have to worry about, okay, well, can I put this bill off for, a couple more days just so I can pay this necessary bill that I need to pay, a light bill, a water bill, rent, mortgage, gas in the car to get back and forth to work. It's hard out here working a minimum wage job. It's hard. And I make a little bit more than my coworkers. And that's only because I worked my way up, because I knew you work your way up, they give you a little bit more money.
Right. I think that's really important the point you just made, because there's a big debate about paying folks $15 an hour, which some people, conservatives especially, but even some Democrats, make that sound like this great amount of money. But as I understand it, you're making $12 an hour as a shift supervisor at Wendy's, and that still isn't enough to make ends meet every month, right?
Not at all. Not at all. I still live paycheck to paycheck, making $12 an hour. And, you know, I have no kids, but I do live with my mother. And, it's like this pandemic, when it happened, I was fearful for my life, my mom's life, and I'm still fearful, even though, these vaccines are out and, everybody's taking them, but it's still a chance that we can catch it. And we take that chance every day just so we can provide for our families with a measly little, in my case, $12 an hour.
And you mean it's a chance every day because working at Wendy's, you're interacting with public, right? So you never
Yeah.
know who's coming in to get food, whether they've got the virus or not. Especially you work in a state where the idea of wearing masks is not something mandatory, and people sometimes wear them and sometimes don't.
Well, yes. And I mean, businesses out here, they do have signs up, you can't come in without a mask. And we do have signs up saying that you can't come in without a mask. But I mean, like I said, it's still that chance. It's gonna always be that chance until, worldwide immunity or whatever happens.
Mhm. So, as we experience this whole debate about $15 an hour, I often made the point on this show and in other places that even if someone made $15 an hour and they worked 52 weeks a year, 40 hours a week, that would only be $31,200 for the whole year, which, in many cities, I don't know about the cost of living in Durham, but in many cities, that isn't enough. And it's only just above the poverty line for a family of four. And the reason I bring that up is you are a really big activist now and very involved in not just the fight for 15, but the whole idea of having dignity and respect and actually unions in the workplace, because that gives you real power, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. This all started with an old job that I had, and I met some people there that were with the NC Raise Up, and we pretty much took matters into our own hands as a collective, as all co-workers, and we stood up for ourselves. and we got the job done. Now that I don't work there anymore, but I do go past there, and it's a much better place. They got rid of everybody that was doing wrong, and it's a great place now. So that's why I believe in this NC Raise Up and the fight for unions. So stuff like that can happen. So we can change this world. So we as workers can have a say so in what happens where we work.
Because actually $15 an hour should be just the base where you start to organize and collectively organize and bargain for even more to have basically a decent living, right?
Yes, correct. I mean, I believe personally it's owed to us. It's about time. Like, minimum wage has been at $7.25 since what, 2003?
And seven, I believe, yes. But it's
2007, but
it's an
I
outrageously
mean,
long time.
yes, they should have raised it by now. We should be at 15 by now. I don't think it's hard for these companies, these billion-dollar companies that we work for, to pay us $15 an hour. We bust our butts for these people, and we don't deserve 15. You say we're essential. You can thank us on TV commercials, but you can't give us $15 an hour. But you can spend $1 billion on TV commercials thanking us, but you can't give us 15.
That's
I
so
don't get it.
true. That's so true. These are very, very profitable companies. And actually, they've really been stealing from all of us, from all minimum wage workers for a very long time. Because actually, if you looked at how hard people work, productivity over 40 years, the minimum wage should be over $20 an hour. It should be actually $22 an hour. So asking for $15 an hour is only somewhat kind of making people up and getting a little bit closer to what it should be. One of the things that you and I talked about before we started recording this program is your perspective as an African American woman and seeing the issues that you are fighting for, not just in the fight for 15, but for a union in terms of race and gender. Talk a little bit about that.
I mean, we're not blind. I mean, some of us are, but we're not blind. It's honestly a matter of, number one, racial equality, because over 40% of people that work in minimum wage jobs are people of color, you know? And then it's like, with my personal experience, it's racial and gender, because, I am a African American woman, and it is proven that women, also make less than men.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes,
to
that's
me,
absolutely true.
this 15 would be like, okay, we see you as a person, not an African American woman, as a person who has been with, this company, who's worked their way up, who is actually in the process of becoming an assistant manager, like, to make more money, you know? So it's like, we want to be seen, we want to be heard. Like, we make these stores and these companies and these production plants and these airports, everything, we make it run. So why can't you pay us our measly? It's $15. You don't think we're worth $15? Your workers and your crew aren't worth $15?
And you're speaking on behalf of not just folks who work in fast food, such as a place like Wendy's, but all sorts of folks who are working minimum wage in the retail sector. You have folks working even in industrial places that are working minimum wage too, right?
Yes, correct. I'm speaking for all people that make poverty wages, clear across the board. Doesn't matter who you are, what you do. If you make poverty wages, I'm speaking about that. We need this 15. It's just, to me, it's a matter of saving this economy. And they say, oh, it's going to bring the economy down. No, it's not. You give us more money, we spend more money in our communities and different places.
Okay, so as we come to the end of our conversation, one of the things I was curious about, Precious, we just talked about that $15 an hour is the minimum that folks should have, and it should be much higher. How did you feel hearing about this discussion in Congress, and how did your fellow coworkers and people you're working with in this campaign feel to hear these people in Congress talk about how $15 an hour is too much, and they actually blocked the idea of getting this $15 minimum wage increase? It just seemed to me to be so outrageous. The conversation was so divorced from the reality of real people.
It hurt. It hurt, but to me personally, my personal opinion, I expected it. I just kind of feel like they weren't going to give in that easy, which is fine because we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep being in their faces until they give us what we want. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep organizing. And sooner or later, we will get our $15 an hour, but it will happen. It will happen. Very disappointed because it would help a lot of people in this economy. It would help a lot. And, like I said, once again, my personal opinion, but I believe if they can give out all this stimulus money to help the economy, I believe that they can give us our $15 an hour.
And if they can spend all this money on the Pentagon and give tax cuts to the very rich people and billionaires, people like Jeff Bezos and these other people are making tens of billions of dollars during the pandemic. It seems pretty easy to give millions of other workers a decent raise and a decent wage. So I'm assuming that in some way it's also inspired folks to work even harder when it comes to fighting for this, right?
Yeah. Yes. Like I said, we're going to keep fighting and we're going to keep doing what we need to do. It's not the end. It's not the last time you've heard our voices.
Well, thank you very much for your courage and for your willingness to fight on behalf not just of yourself, but other people. And we will follow this on this show, and it'll be great to have you back to update us as you continue the struggle and the campaign. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.